When I first began sculpting, I wanted to create realistic and detailed horses in clay so much, especially how to sculpt beautiful horse heads full of expression, and I figured out how to do it. Now, I'd love to show you my step-by-step process as I sculpt this horse head in polymer clay while sharing all my tips, materials, and tools. I begin with an armature made from steel wire and aluminum foil as an affordable and rigid support system for my clay. As I design it to mimic the skeletal structure of a horse, this armature also helps to set the proportions. Next is a roughly shaped clay base, made at first with beige super sculpey because it's easiest to shape. Then I switch to a mixture of beige and firm gray as I find it's less squishy for areas I need to hold their shape. I always start sculptures with the profile first, then the volume second. I'll reshape the clay often to fit proportions. As you can see, the head got a little too bulky. Once I'm happy with the outline, I bake this layer to give me a firm work surface for the next layers. Calipers are used for checking proportions. I set out my proportions based on the width of the ear base to the eye and take measurements for the rest of the head using that as my reference. I use Sharpie markers to make marks to guide me, and I adjust these a few times to get them just right. I've learned that raw layers of polymer clay adhere best to baked layers using Sculpey polymer glue, which I apply thinly. While not a true glue, it's basically a super sticky liquid version of polymer, so it won't actually hold like a glue until you bake it. I begin blocking in the general masses of the face, mostly the cheek muscles, aka the jowls, the bony ridge of the cheekbones, and bony eye ridges. These bony ridges are most prominent on horses of most breeds, and because they are so easy to spot in real horses, I find it's a great landmark to guide my sculpting. Next, I block in the ear bases and bony landmarks between the ears and eyes, then carve out the eye orbits with the wax carving tool. It's okay if everything is very rough at this stage, as it will all come together later. Just trust the process. For nicely proportioned and quick eyes, I add steel ball bearings into the eye orbits and take my time to make sure they are balanced from all angles. This always looks a bit scary. Staying loose, I block in the muscles further down the face, as well as the lips of the muzzle, then the nostrils. At this stage, the muzzle is very rough, and I'm really just after the overall mass, which I check to see if it's correct by squinting at it. If the blurry mass needs adjustments, I carve or add clay as needed. By the way, if you're enjoying this, I share projects like this once a month, as well as videos about other animals and all sorts of art media. I'd love to take you with me on my art journey if you'd like to subscribe. I start to fill in areas using a wax carving tool and later a ball stylus to shape, move the clay, and smooth the clay. I further smooth with my gloves, which isn't perfect, but is good for now. At this stage, I'm trying to get the general mass looking good from all angles. I'll worry about detail accuracy later. I'm squinting a lot to help me see if it looks correct for a realistically sculpted horse. Squinting helps me see that I need to add more mass to the cheeks and around the eyes, and I also notice that one eye has gotten off center, so I push it back into place and fill some clay behind it. This mare is still very rough and has a long way to go, but at least it's not a bug-eyed monster. Adding some temporary ears soon will help too. I use assorted tools like wax carving tools and especially ball stylus tools to help push, carve, and shape the clay. I'm aiming for a softer definition, and smoothing with my gloves helps blend the tool marks to get that softer look. Well, kind of. Like I said, it has a long way to go. Trust the process. I'm constantly checking the head from all angles to make sure it is balanced and also interesting from multiple viewpoints. This is the stage where I start to think more about the specifics of the breed I'm trying to represent and asking myself questions like, does the profile of the head match the profiles on real Maori mares? I saw that the jowls were too big for Maori mares, so I adjusted that as well as some places around the top of the skull and top of the eyes. All of my adjustments are still big picture at this stage, and I'll save finer details like the eyelids, nostrils, and lips for later. If I work on them now, I could get so lost in detail that I'm unable to spot an issue with the big picture, or, as is more often the case, I'll just squish the fine details when I go back and edit a big picture item. The latter is usually my luck. My sculpting process is very much back and forth from adding clay to reshaping, then carving it off, then adding it back on until the horse I want starts to emerge from the clay. Some of the carving I did with a loop tool, shaving off very fine bits of clay at a time. Now that I have a general horse-shaped head, taking off smaller amounts has bigger impacts. It takes only paper-thin amounts to get a shape of head that is becoming distinctly more Maori. I'm kind of amazed how such a tiny change can have such impact. I almost wonder if this is one of the reasons why I struggled as a beginner sculptor back in the day. Was I taking too much off then? Settling into my groove with my back and forth sculpting process, I settled in for long sessions of trying to develop her exact likeness and starting to tell a story with her emotions. After that extensive back and forth process, which takes several days, I'm feeling pretty good about her anatomy and softer look. Now I can start setting her facial expression. I begin with the muzzle, using the spade end of a wax carving tool to open up her lips and push up her top lip so she can look like she's either about to massage the shoulder of another horse or playfully react to her surroundings. Her expression looks a little angry at first, and I realize this is largely due to how the eyes currently look, so I open those up and begin adding a softer, playful expression. That helps a lot. Okay, so here's the thing about art. The creation process is such an ebb and flow. I often find that the early stages of blocking in the shapes is fast. It's much easier to get a generally horse-shaped object in a shorter time frame than with the details. Once I hit the detail stage, there's so much back and forth adjustment. This stage takes the longest time and sometimes feels like it's barely creeping along until, bam, it's done. This varies by style, of course. If I'm working in a more abstract style, I can ask myself if the sculpture feels like what I want, and I can reach that stage faster with less detail. When I'm working in a realism style, I have to ask myself if the anatomy and details actually look like the real thing, and often the answer is no or not yet. So more time is spent trying to get those details just right. It's certainly a balancing act, and for some of it, I had to shut off the camera to really focus, especially as I reached a stage where I felt like I just didn't like her and couldn't get her likeness as I wanted. This stage can get frustrating, so what I often do is spend a little time on a sculpture that's in the earlier stages, as that rough stage feels so full of promise and it gives me energy to return to the details of the sculpture. I often get asked how I sculpt my ears, and I start by rolling out a noodle of clay and then flattening it, making sure one end has a tapered point, which will be the tip of the ear. I take a moment to shape this so it starts looking more like the outline of a horse's ear, then I mark out the length I need. Most horse ears are about the same length as the distance from the corner of the eye to the base of the ear. Using a rubber-tipped clay shaper, I roll the clay around my tool to get the shape started, then bend the ear tip. Maori horses have very unusual ears, and their ear tips aren't just curled backwards. They're longer, and they port inwards a little too, so it took me a couple attempts to get the curl just right. I make a point at the other end for inserting into the head, and then cover the base with clay. Baking the ears helps keep me from accidentally squishing them. I often get asked about baking polymer clay too, and I follow the instructions in the package for the temperature and times. I often bake in stages, so I have a firm base to work on for layers, and when I bake, I place the sculptures inside these tins and seal up with aluminum foil to ensure even baking. This protects from any temperature fluctuations, and I use an oven thermometer to help monitor those. I think at this point you have a really good idea of what the process is like. So, are you ready to see her now? If you enjoyed this video, you might want to check out this too, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!